It's a pleasure to be in the company of Sophie Hannah, and we'll be discussing the Queen of Crime, Agatha Christie, her most famous fictional detective, Hercule Poirot, and Sophie's new Poirot novels. Sophie, I'd like to begin by saying that Agatha Christie began writing Poirot, her crime fiction, about 100 years ago. Despite the fact that the crime fiction market has grown hugely since then and diversified into many different genres, she remains the unchallenged queen of crime, the largest selling author in the world. Yes. What is the reason for this success?
Well, I think, yes, it's almost exactly 100 years since she published her first book, and many, many great crime writers have published books since then. But in my opinion, Agatha Christie is still the best. Someone's clapping, that's good. When you think about what she did with the crime genre, and when you think of her books like Murder on the Orient Express, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, and then there were none, Death on the Nile, A Murder is Announced. She wrote book after book where she wasn't just writing an ordinary murder mystery, she was writing a story in each case that advanced the genre, that showed that it was capable of doing new, innovative things that no one had done before. She had lots of structural ideas about how the crime novel could be made more interesting, and she implemented so many of them. And when you think of that, her sort of formal experimentation and how she expanded the genre, I think that's one reason. Nobody else has done as much to make the crime novel such an ambitious genre as Agatha. And then when you think of that in conjunction with her amazing writing, she has this almost magical style of writing where her books are incredibly simple. I got hooked on them when I was 12, and they were not too difficult for me. They're accessible, they're readable, they're fun, and yet, when I reread them now, at the age of 47, they're still really intellectually challenging. I can't work out the clues and get to the solution before the detective. So I can't think of any other writer who can write incredibly simple books that are also incredibly intellectually challenging and complicated. So I do think she is a unique genius, and I think that's why she's still the best and still the queen of crime.
Well, her commercial success, we all know about that. There is a distinction in today's world, maybe it wasn't there when she was writing, between commercial and literary writing. So, where would you place Agatha Christie? Do you think she is just pure entertainment? You said she's intellectually challenging, yes, but that's also entertainment, just like doing probably a good crossword puzzle or finding a good jigsaw puzzle. It's entertainment in a way and also intellectually challenging. But literary qualities are different. Did you find in the reading that you've done, and I think you've read everything she's written?
I have, about 5 times.
Yeah. So did you, could you sort of elucidate on the literary quality of her writing?
Yeah, so I think it's unfortunate that popular stroke commercial and literary are seen as opposites, and they are. In our contemporary literary world, generally you're seen as being either a popular/commercial writer or a literary writer, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be both. It's kind of crazy that people can't see this, and Agatha is absolutely both. So there's no denying that she's commercial and popular. She's sold billions of books and is the best-selling novelist that's ever lived, so we've dealt with that one. But I think she is a literary writer, and there's several reasons why I think that. One is, I think a literary novel has to be doing more than just telling an entertaining story, and I think hers do. So yes, she is concerned with the puzzle and the entertainment, but her main interest is in human beings and human nature and psychology and, the human condition, really. And when you read her books, especially now when I read them, having read them 5 times each, and I know every plot point, they are still really enlightening to read because there's so much wisdom and insight about everything, what people are really like, the dangers of evil, what exactly is evil. Is it something that we have to fear from other people more, or is it something that actually we're better off fearing within ourselves? In Death on the Nile, Poirot has that whole brilliant dialogue with Jacqueline where he says, "I warn you, mademoiselle," this is my Poirot accent, everyone look impressed with my Belgian accent, "I warn you, mademoiselle, do not allow evil to take root in your heart." And that's really radical for somebody writing in the 1930s. Most crime fiction of that period, and even most crime fiction now, the danger coming from evil is the baddie who's going around killing people. So Poirot psychologically and Miss Marple have lots of insightful things to say, and there's lots of wisdom about life. I also think that the fact that Agatha was so obviously interested in the form she was writing in makes her indisputably a literary writer. She wasn't just thinking, I want to tell a story about a murder on a big ship, say, for Death on the Nile, and Then There Were None. She wasn't thinking, I want to just write a story set on a scary island. She was thinking, what can the form of the crime novel be stretched to accommodate that it hasn't done before? With Roger Ackroyd, I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but I'm sure some of you will know, what she did at the end of Roger Ackroyd, lots of people were cross and said this is cheating, but it wasn't cheating. She presented everything very carefully so that she was playing fair and at the same time doing something no one had ever done. So I think if you're a writer who actually cares about the constraints and possibilities of the form you're writing in, that makes you undoubtedly a literary writer, however popular your books might be.
If I'm not wrong, then Five Little Pigs is one of her novels in which she did something different in the sense that she takes the viewpoint of several characters, which is something which we do today in literary fiction. Very often we change the viewpoint, we change the voice.
Yeah.
And was that something ahead of her time?
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the interesting things, actually, I've written 3 Poirot novels now, and the second one, Closed Casket, is set in a big country house, which I actually found on an estate agent's website. I went looking for my house. I love spending time on estate agents' websites. It's one of my hobbies. And it's hard to find a house that big because you need bedrooms for all the suspects and the murder victim and the detective's sidekick. And when I published that book, loads of people said, oh, we love this book because it feels like classic Agatha because it's set in a big country house and the murderer is necessarily going to be someone staying in the house. And I thought that was really interesting because I know what people mean when they say that's classic Agatha, but in fact, she wrote so many different kinds of novels. She wrote a novel that starts with Poirot going to the dentist. 1-2 Buckle My Shoe, it's called in English. And yet nobody thinks of dentistry-based murder mysteries as classic Agatha, and yet she wrote one. And if you look at all of her 36 Poirot novels, there's so much variety. There's some like the ABC Murders where Poirot's there from chapter 1. There's some like Cat Among the Pigeons, which is set in a girls' boarding school, where Poirot's barely in it. He turns up in the last 2 chapters and kind of says, well, I can see none of you are making much progress, so I guess I'd better come and solve the mystery. So one of the things, when people say, oh, when you're writing your Poirot novels, try to make them Agatha-ish, I always say, bear in mind that Agatha Christie did so many different things. What you're thinking of as Agatha-ish is probably not true of more of her books than it is true of.
Yeah.
There was something grammatically wrong with that sentence, but you know what I mean.
Well, we'll come to... you already sort of had a body of work before you started on the Poirot novels.
Yes.
Now, Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot as far as I know, his career and I think even his life ended in Curtain
Yes.
in 1975. That was the last Poirot novel that we know of. So then how did it come about that in 2014 you wrote a new Poirot novel? Can you tell us a bit about this journey?
Yes, well, first of all, I should say that it's quite true that Agatha did, in fact, kill Poirot at the end of Curtain, which is probably why Curtain is my least favourite Poirot novel. Not that I'm disputing her choices, but I don't want to read about Poirot dying. So I certainly didn't resurrect him from the dead. When that was tried in Dallas, it didn't work very well. Do you remember Bobby Ewing came back from the dead? So we were always very clear that we were not going to bring Poirot back to life. What I chose to do instead was set my Poirot novels in the 4 years between 1928 and 1932, when Agatha didn't write a Poirot novel. So she published Mystery of the Blue Train in 1928, and until she then published Peril at End House in 1932, there were no Poirot novels. She was writing other novels, she wrote a play. So Poirot was unaccounted for during that period. So after discussions with the Christie family, that was when we decided that any books I wrote featuring Poirot should be set. And that seemed like a good place to set them as well, because that's kind of what I think of as the classic Poirot era, 20s, early 30s. So that was something we all agreed about. We did also talk about whether mine should be a prequel, like before The Mysterious Affair at Styles, but I didn't want to do that because The Mysterious Affair at Styles is the first Poirot, and a prequel would seem to be challenging that in some way. So I thought to slot in between 1929 and 1932 seemed a good approach. How it came about, and I'm always very keen to tell people this because lots of people say to me, how did you persuade the Christies to let you write Poirot? And I hate the thought that people imagine that I went round pestering Agatha Christie's family. It would never have occurred to me in a million years that I should write Poirot. I was very happy just reading about him. And it would never have occurred to the Christie family that I should write Poirot either, because they'd never heard of me. So how it came about was that my literary agent, who is a very strange chap, he was in a meeting at HarperCollins, and he noticed that he was sitting next to a big shelf full of Agatha Christie books, and he remembered that I was a big fan. And so he just interrupted this meeting. He's a real maverick. He just says whatever's on his mind at any given time. And so without telling me he was going to do this or checking whether it would be okay, he just said to this editor at HarperCollins, you know what you ought to do? You ought to ask my author, Sophie Hannah, to write a new Poirot novel or Miss Marple or something. You know, Agatha Christie's been dead for many years. Why aren't you doing some kind of new books with her characters? So he rang me to tell me he'd made this suggestion, and I was really embarrassed because I thought the family aren't going to want that. HarperCollins aren't going to want that. So I said to him, what did this editor say in response? And he said, well, the editor said, absolutely no way is this ever going to happen. The family would hate nothing more than for someone else to write any of Agatha's characters. So I said, okay, fine, put the phone down, and then realised that I was actually quite annoyed because half an hour earlier I'd been quite happy not writing Poirot novels or even thinking that I should. And then now, even though I still wasn't writing Poirot novels, something had changed. And I realised that basically my agent, out of the blue, had created an opportunity for me to be rejected for something that I would never have thought to apply for. So I thought, I hope he doesn't make a habit of this. I hope he doesn't ring up tomorrow and say, well, I asked Brad Pitt if he wanted to marry you, and he said no. Anyway, so then the next evening, my agent rang up again, and he said, the Christie family want to meet you. And I said, really, are you hallucinating? What's going on here? Because I thought we'd established that this was not happening. He said, well, I don't know why they want to meet you, but they do. So I thought they wanted to kind of serve me with an injunction or something. I thought, news has got back to them that I'm after Poirot or Miss Marple. But when we arrived at the meeting, it turned out that a real weird coincidence had happened. The very next day, after my agent had made this suggestion to HarperCollins, the editor from HarperCollins had had a meeting with the Christie family, and Matthew Pritchard, who is Agatha's grandson, and who at the time was the chairman of Agatha Christie Limited, Matthew started that meeting by saying to the HarperCollins team, "This is going to surprise you after everything we've said for all these years, but we, the family, have decided that we want new books, or at least a new book." At which point the editor said, "This is really weird. I had a strange agent in my office yesterday, and he thinks he might have the perfect author." So it was just that coincidence of timing and my agent happening to open his mouth at that moment that led to it being me. Because probably there would have been a new book, but the only reason I got to write that new book is because my agent thought of it one day, and it happened to be the day before Matthew Pritchard said that to HarperCollins. So it was a weird bit of serendipity, really.
Yeah, it's like the universe almost willing it to happen. What I'd like to ask you is how you've already sort of set your hand as a crime fiction writer. You have written a whole lot of psychological crime novels, which have done well too. Now, how was it to work with a ready-made character, somebody who did not emerge from your, creative process, and was already sort of well established in the reader's mind? What was the kind of challenge that you faced, and how did you strike a balance between what was known and what you would do to him?
Well, in terms of writing about Poirot, it really felt almost as though I was being asked to write about someone I knew in real life. I had known Poirot very well since I was 12. I'd reread the books 4 or 5 times, and so it didn't feel like, how am I ever going to be able to do this? Because I know Poirot, so I thought I will write about the Poirot that I know and love. And that didn't feel any more difficult than if someone said, write a novel in which your husband is a character. I could do that as well. So I just treated Poirot as though he was a real person that I know. And I didn't let that faze me at all. The challenge for me was, I was always very clear that what I was going to be writing was new Poirot novels, not new Agatha Christie novels. So nobody can write Agatha Christie novels apart from Agatha Christie. And this is something that I always want to clarify, because sometimes I do events. I do Poirot events all the time. And often when it comes to the Q&A, someone will put their hand up and say, "So are you Agatha Christie now?" And I always have to go, "No. Nobody's Agatha Christie anymore. I'm still just me, but I'm writing new Poirot novels." So I had to think about narrative approach, narrative perspective. And I thought, because I'm a new person writing about Poirot who's never written about him before, I felt it would be helpful to me to create a new narrator who hasn't been in any of Agatha Christie's novels, and have that narrator being the voice of my Poirot novels. So I created a new sidekick for Poirot, who is Inspector Edward Catchpool of Scotland Yard, and he's a new person. So I thought, if the prose style of my Poirot novels is different from the prose style of Agatha's, which obviously it will be because I'm a different writer, then that will be quite neatly explained by the fact that Catchpool is a new character thinking and writing about Poirot. So that felt like a kind of authentic way to deal with that. And I also wanted to invent Catchpool because I wanted to give Poirot a very particular kind of sidekick. Normally, sidekicks in crime fiction are not themselves good detectives. So Hastings, who's lovely, is not a good detective, and weirdly, he doesn't get any better at working stuff out, despite hanging around with Poirot for nearly all of his life. And I kept thinking, if I worked with Poirot on case after case, I like to think that I'd get a bit better at solving murders. So I like the idea of creating Catchpool, who could be almost like a sort of, Poirot could almost be a mentor or a teacher, And Catchpool is a good detective. He's just nowhere near as good as Poirot. He's a good detective in an ordinary sort of way. He's a sort of person that could probably solve most ordinary crimes, but when weird, cryptic, baffling puzzle mysteries come up, then he doesn't know what to do. And so in my first novel featuring Poirot and Catchpool, Catchpool is in a bit of a strop most of the time. He's all worked up and feeling kind of undervalued because he can't handle the fact that he's suddenly working with this brilliant genius when he thought he was quite good, but now he's seeing that maybe he's not that good. And in Closed Casket, my second one, and then Mystery of Three Quarters, Catchpool gets into more of a rhythm in each one of working with Poirot, and he's learning from Poirot all the time. So my idea is that as my Poirot novels continue, we will actually see the benefits to Catchpool of having Poirot there, training him and working with him. And in a way, that's wish fulfillment for me, because in my fantasy world, I'd like to be Poirot's sidekick, and I'd always be there with a notebook, like with a big heading saying, what can I learn from Poirot today? So that one day I might be nearly as good as him, though obviously not as good. So that's how I decided to approach it.
Well, if you'd been, I think Poirot did have a literary sidekick. Ariadne Oliver wasn't she one of his,
She was, and
yeah.
she's a brilliant character. I mean, all the minor characters in Agatha's books are amazing. But again, Mrs. Oliver, although she's brilliant at writing her books, she's never... Whenever somebody helps Poirot in Agatha's Poirot novels, they help him by going and doing a practical task. So he might say, go and stand at the train station and see if anyone gets off the train wearing a big hat. And they'll go off and do that. But I don't think Agatha ever had a character who kind of chewed things over with him intellectually on an almost equal basis. And so I wanted Catchpool to be able to do that, with the proviso that obviously Poirot would always be the one to come up with that spark of brilliance at the end that solves it all.
Talking a little more about Catchpool, there was one quote which, when I was reading the Monogram Murders, that I rather liked, and I felt this gives you an idea of what kind of a new character you've created in Catchpool. At one place he says, I see dead bodies in the course of my work, and it has never bothered me unduly. No, the thing I dread above all is the proximity to death in the living. This, to me, was something new. It shows not an unintended... I mean, this is a sidekick who's different. He's more meditative. Yeah. He's more like the modern reader, of crime fiction. Was this a sort of a deliberate thing that you did?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, with a character like Poirot, he's a sort of perfect blend of real person with all his strange ways, like his obsessive-compulsive tidiness and his weird obsession with his moustache. And so he's recognisable as a flawed human being, but he's also a superhero. If you think about it, Poirot is a mystery-solving superhero. He just appears. He doesn't quite come down on an umbrella like Mary Poppins out of the sky, but he almost does. Wherever there's a murder, there he is. He's rented a cottage in the grounds, or he's growing marrows down the road. And it's not realistic, but nobody cares because he's a superhero who's just there when needed. And so is Miss Marple. And so characters like that are better seen from the outside. It would be awful, I think, to have a Poirot novel narrated by Poirot. It wouldn't feel appropriate to have that level of closeness to his thoughts. He has to be seen externally. And I wanted to write books in which the contrast was working well between that approach to Poirot and a much more interior approach to Catchpool, whose every thought the reader is privy to. I think it is a fairly modern... I mean, in Golden Age crime, there was plenty of psychology there, but it was dealt with in a sort of brisker, more surface way. Whereas Catchpool, I wanted him to be writing his own thoughts and feelings, because obviously, Poirot is a heritage property, but I'm writing these books now. And I think for modern readers, you need a bit more direct psychological goodies, I think.
One of the features of her novels, I mean, is the means of murder. We are always interested in finding out how the murder was committed. And she uses poison a fair bit.
She does.
Now, so in fact, that's how one acquired a fair bit of knowledge of poison itself, the different kinds of poison, arsenic poisoning and the symptoms of that, and so on and so forth. Now, the thing is that she did have some training, and she had a lot of knowledge about poison.
Yes.
Does poison make for a good plot? I mean, you know, all the intricacies of how do you get the poison, and when do you administer it, and how do you do that, what do you slip it into, and so on and so forth.
Well, as you say, she was fascinated by that, and she did know everything about poison because she worked in a pharmacist's dispensary during the war. And this may be something where I'm different from Agatha Christie. So in a lot of ways, I share her storytelling interests. She loves really weird plot hooks, intriguing mysteries where the reader's thinking, I can't even imagine why that would have happened. You know, not just here's a dead body, who killed them, but here's a dead body, and before they died, they said, why didn't they ask Evans? What's going on there? You just can't even begin to speculate. So, like Agatha, I love those intriguing hooks. Like Agatha, I love unguessable, twisty solutions. One key difference between us, apart from the fact that she's obviously a great genius and I'm just a frizzy-haired normal person, but another difference between us is I'm not that interested in the method of murder. And I think in all my books, I murder people in the easiest way possible, just to get them murdered so that the mystery can start. So I personally, you know, I have got poison. In fact, in both the Monogram murders and Closed Casket, poison is heavily involved. But the part of my research when I had to find out about the relevant poisons and what they did, and somebody would do this if they... I wasn't massively keen on that. In an ideal world, I would just say, this person was murdered, never mind how, now let's start to think about the relationships and the why. And I think for that reason, I prefer Agatha's books where the poison is not... I mean, in The Mysterious Affair at Styles, the ending is really clever, but a lot of that cleverness is to do with the precise thing around the poison, and it gets quite scientific, and at that point I found it quite hard to follow. So yeah, I think that is a difference.
This is my last question before we open it to the audience. If someone who has never read a Poirot novel were to ask you for suggestions, which 4, 5 would you recommend?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm glad you gave me 4 or 5. Okay, Evil Under the Sun, an amazing Poirot novel. Murder on the Orient Express, obviously, cleverest solution in the whole of crime fiction. My personal current favourite is The Hollow. The Hollow is an amazing novel about a group of people, a family, and the people around that family. And it's a brilliant murder mystery, but it's also a brilliant novel about people. There are some of Agatha's books that feel like the murder mystery puzzle is 99% of it. And that's fine. I love, like, Murder on the Orient Express, I would put in that category, and it's one of my favourites. But The Hollow, if there happened not to be a brilliant murder mystery in that book, you'd still want to read it because of all the character relationship stuff. How many have I had? 3? 3, okay. I think I'd probably say 3-act tragedy, which is not one that you hear talked about a lot. But that one, I think of that one as one of Agatha's extra special, conceptual, ambitious books, because there are 3 murders in it. And the second murder in it is kind of a conventional murder, but the first and the third are conceptually so bold and daring. Both of them, she's doing something that hasn't been done before in crime fiction. So I would say that. And then the last one, it would probably be either... See, I would say Murder in Mesopotamia, but that's brilliant, but it has a serious flaw. Maybe the ABC Murders. That's a really great one, and that's another one where she does something that now people do a lot, but she was the first to do it. I do like the ones best where she's doing something extra ambitious in a structural way.
Yeah, we are now open to the audience for questions. I think about 4 or 5 questions is what we can take. Yeah.
Okay, there's a
I can see the hands.
Lady on the second row, is there?
Yeah. There's somebody.
Is there a roving mic?
You could take. You could take this one.
Yes, you might have to commute to ask your questions.
Hi, mad Christie fan, read by first at age 8.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the catchpole thing is really interesting. So since it comes right in the middle of his peak years,
Yes.
how do you plan to deal with him, because there is no catchpole thereafter?
Good point. No one's ever asked me that. That is such a great question. Just in case, did everyone hear the question? Yeah. Well, it's really tricky because, firstly, I don't know how many Poirot novels I'm going to write. I know that I'm writing at least one more because I'm working on it at the moment and it's in the publisher's schedule for 2020. But that's the last one I've been contracted to write, and I have no idea. I mean, I've always said the only reason I want to do this and feel comfortable doing it is because the Christie family asked me to do it. They want these books. And I'm not sure whether they will want an infinite number or whether they'll think 4 is the right number. So it's not even as if I can, write into the next one, a final scene where Poirot says, "Goodbye, Catchpole, and I'm never going to mention you again until I die in 1975. Because I don't know if I then am asked to write more. So it's tricky. I suspect that I just won't deal with it at all, and so it will just be one of those things. And there's actually quite a few things like this in Agatha Christie. The only things that are mentioned in any book are the ones that are relevant to that book. So there's lots of Poirot novels where Hastings doesn't get a mention, and so I think it will have to just be. I mean, unless, if the Christie family say the 4th one is definitely the last one we want, then I might put in a sort of goodbye to Catchpole sort of thing. But I'd rather not, actually, because, what if in 10 years' time the Christies say, now we want it? I mean, who knows?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think I'll just have to leave that and, assume that the readers will understand, because obviously my books were written later.
Yeah. What's the flaw in Murder in Mesopotamia?
Okay, so without giving any spoilers, the flaw in Murder in Mesopotamia, which you should all reread because it is brilliant in many ways, the flaw is that the murder victim, as it is, doesn't recognise a potential threat from the person who goes on to be the murderer. And I am willing to suspend disbelief to the moon and back. And I actually think all of Agatha's plots, apart from that one, are plausible. They may be very unlikely to happen, but they could happen. Scientifically, they could happen. Murder in Mesopotamia, I just simply didn't believe that it would be possible that the victim would not just go, "It's you." Do you know what I mean? I just don't buy it. And it frustrates me because she could so easily have fixed that by, introducing plastic surgery or something. But as it stands, I don't think it's plausible. But some of my favourite Christie novels are ones that I believe are flawed. I mean, And Then There Were None. It's not a Poirot or a Marple, it's a standalone. That could make a strong case for being her best novel ever. I mean, that's the one that got voted the best. It's her best-selling book, and it's clearly a masterpiece. But there's a flaw in that as well, which is that one of the people who's meant to have done this terrible crime that they need to be punished for has done something much less culpable than all of the others. So I think all of the others behaved in a way that led directly to a death. One of them didn't, and so I would have preferred it if the murderer had made sure that all of them did. I'm very pedantic, as you can see, but you know that I will always prefer a novel that's flawed but amazing in loads of ways to a novel that does everything right but isn't as gripping or enjoyable to read. Any other questions? There's a couple of hands up over there.
I actually have two questions. The first question is that Hercule Poirot, who is such a loved character. So, did you have some apprehension writing the character again? Like, were you afraid, like, how people will receive it? And my second question is, did it sort of feel like writing fan fiction for your favorite author?
Yeah. I'm very sort of traditional and old-fashioned. I didn't know what fan fiction was. That's not something I knew about until after, I'd agreed to write Poirot. But yeah, I'm a fan, and I'm writing fiction about Agatha's character, so it absolutely is fan fiction. Unless there's some other part of the definition of fan fiction that rules out my Poirot novels, it's absolutely fan fiction. And one of my main motivations in writing it was just to kind of share my love of Agatha Christie with other people who love Agatha Christie. In terms of was I worried about the reaction, I wasn't, but that's because I knew that there would be some people who would say, Poirot written by anyone but Agatha? No. Sorry, but no. I just knew that would be the reaction because it's just natural. People don't like change. And people who love Agatha's Poirot novels, it emerged fairly soon after the book was announced that, lots of people went, yay, more Poirot, can't wait to read this new kind of Poirot. And other people went, oh no, Poirot, I just am happy if people like what I'm writing. But if people don't like what I'm writing, then I respect that and think that's absolutely fine too. There was a question over there.
I have a question. So did you consider another Christie character other than Poirot at any point? I'm just wondering if someone like, say, Tommy and Tuppence, where there are not a lot of books written about them, would have been easier to work with?
I was always very clear that I wanted to write about either Poirot or Miss Marple. They were my favourite characters to read about. I think they're Christie's best characters, and they're the ones I really know. I don't know Tommy and Tuppence as well. And so the reason I decided on Poirot was that the particular plot idea I had worked better for his character. And then lots of people said to me, do you think you'll ever write a Marple after Poirot? And I just feel fairly strongly that I shouldn't. Somebody else, if more Marple novels are wanted by the family, then I think somebody else should write those. Maybe not Donald Trump, but somebody. I would feel that having taken on Poirot, that's enough of a commitment. I don't think Poirot would like it if I wrote about Miss Marple as well.
Are there any plans of your novels, Poirot novels, being filmed?
Not as far as I know, because there's a huge resurgence at the moment of interest in filming Agatha's books. So there was a big Murder on the Orient Express movie recently. There's one coming for Death on the Nile. The BBC in England are doing lots of TV versions. And so there's this renewed interest in doing still more adaptations of Agatha's books. And I think for as long as that continues, people aren't going to... it's not going to occur to anyone to do mine. And I have to say, I'm very happy about that, because I've had two of my other books, what I call my non-Poirot novels, I've had two of them done for TV, and it's a mixed blessing. I think I prefer for my books to just be books, and then the reader's imagination can create the visuals. Once you let someone turn your book into a film, they can pretty much do whatever they want to it, and it's not always a wise decision.
The last question. This has to be the last one. We're running out of time.
This is not a question. This is just saying that you're very courageous to take up what you're taking. Because
thank you.
despite everything, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Agatha Christie fans, that there is always going to be a fear taking up another author's character. So you're doing a very good job. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, thank you. That's very, very kind of you. I mean, I have to say, I don't really feel I'm being particularly brave. What I'm doing is, because when it was suggested to me, I thought it was creatively a very exciting prospect and a way of celebrating Poirot. I just thought, I have to do it. I have to err on the side of optimism and think, this could be great. I could write stories that Poirot fans enjoy. And, I did a sort of risk assessment and I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is I'll do it really badly and everyone will think I'm an idiot. And I wasn't scared of that because throughout my life, people have thought I'm an idiot many times. Especially when I was a teenager, I was an idiot nearly every day. So I wasn't worried about that. And I think, it's important to try and do something if you think it's a valuable thing to do, rather than be scared of it and think, oh, no, I won't bother. And I'm really glad I've done it because effectively, this is something I didn't foresee when I said I'd write Poirot. I've kind of become an Agatha Christie missionary. I travel all over the world talking about how great Agatha Christie is. And that's a really great thing to be able to do because wherever I go, I meet the Agatha Christie fans in that place. And I feel as though I'm working for something bigger than me and greater than me. And that's a really nice feeling.
We know that she wrote a lot of novels that were sort of inspired by her travels. Now that you've traveled to India, and I think this is your first visit, do you think you could set an Agatha Christie novel in India? In Bangalore, perhaps?
Well, I will say this. I had been thinking, I mentioned Evil Under the Sun as being one of my favourite Poirots, and what I love about that novel is he's on holiday. He's on holiday at this beach hotel, and my personal obsession is beaches, swimming pools, and nice hotels. Some of you may have seen me by the swimming pool today, or in the swimming pool. I'm an absolute posh hotel obsessive, and if I can swim or be on a beach, then I want to be. So I have been thinking maybe my fourth Poirot novel will have Poirot on holiday somewhere. And who knows? I haven't yet picked a destination, but I will certainly bear it in mind.
Well, we have lots of beaches.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
I've been invited to the Kerala Literary Festival in January, and the person who invited me was smart enough to say the festival takes place on a beach. I was like, that sounds good.
Thank you very much, Sophie, for all that you've shared with us. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. Have a good evening.